It should never go off. You know what? That's the art thing. That doesn't, I think it might need a new bulb replacement.
But he's figured that out. Thank you. You would have been very proud of me with the crowds this morning. That's what I want.
Steve wasn't here either.
No. Huh?
You're ever open to
No, I did it. I did the full, and
me in any way.
it was helpful with the numbers and matching. I was right there.
Yes.
I was very happy to participate in that very specific way.
The Rimonim.
Try the melody. Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Hag Sameach. It's nice to come into Shabbat and to conclude this week of freedom, this week of Passover together. My name's Kavod Weider, rabbi here, and along with Cantor Natalie Young and with Marcy Howard, Evan Wool, and Steve Velez, we're going to be your guides for this Soul Spark Shabbat. We also have a number of what would we call call them. We have a number of
Our
folks.
soul sparks.
Our soul sparks throughout our congregation, throughout the chapel today. This also begins our 2022 Rabbi Alan Krauss Scholar in Residence Weekend. This year we are so pleased to be able to share Rabbi Sid Schwartz. You can give a little wave over there, who will be joining us for this weekend, both tonight and tomorrow night. We'll say more about tomorrow. After services tonight, he will be speaking about reimagining the American synagogue, and we'll say more about that later. But for now, we're gliding into Shabbat. A couple other details. If you're new here to Temple Bethel, if you need to use a restroom, it's just right out the door. Go all the way down to the end and make a right, and there's restrooms there. You can also notice where exits are. There's one right here that goes outside and all the way down the hall, and of course the front, and you can just think about where those may be if there was an emergency and we needed to use them. And also just want to say that I really appreciate people who are choosing to still be here and be in community, and wearing masks, that this is something that you feel comfortable to come and be here and take care of yourself. So I just want to encourage anybody who needs to do anything in order to feel comfortable to do that. This is a wonderful place for all of us to be exactly where we need to be. So we call it the Soul Spark Shabbat. And it comes from this sense, this word soul is a mysterious word. I think the way that I'd like to hold it, to frame it this evening is, what do you call that which is most essential in each one of us? What is that part of ourselves that is clear, radiates our own unique being, our own unique essence? That part of ourselves inside, that awareness in ourselves, is an awareness that is at one with creation. It feels absolutely connected to everyone and everything. And most of the time we move through our lives not always connected from that place. We move through our lives with a lot of doing. Unfortunately, for all of us, we're more human doings than we are human beings. And so Shabbat comes to allow us to stop for a moment and sink a little deeper into who are we beneath all of the perceptions of the world, perceptions of ourselves. Who are we at our essence, beyond fear? Just take a moment to feel, to just turn your attention inward, to be here in this moment, to feel the aliveness of this moment. This is the soul spark. And this evening, we're going to be using music to turn inward. We're going to be using silence to turn inward. You've noticed that you don't have a prayer book, but just a prayer sheet, which is the idea is that the words are just jumping off places for us to move inside. We'll be doing a lot of repetitive melodies. I encourage you to just give yourself to it, try it on, let yourself be part of the flow and the wave. And then after the melodies are done, give space. We're gonna be quiet for a moment and let what we've created resonate and vibrate. And we're not so anxious to get on to the next one. So we invite you to inhabit that space. So to begin our service, we want to invite up Ellen and Duncan Prince to lead us in lighting of candles in honor of their 48th anniversary.
Wait, 1 second. 48 years. Gonna have to share some wisdom with all of us. my blessing for you in this next chapter of your love story is that you find new ways to see each other. It's very easy to fall into routine with long relationships, and sometimes we forget about the depth of one another. So my blessing for you is that in these next years together, that you can find new ways of connecting, find new ways of honoring one another, and that you can deepen your relationship in a way that hasn't been before. It is so wonderful to see you surrounded by your friends here at the temple, and we are so grateful that you've been such an integral part of this community, that you have been so generous with your wife and giving her the space to share her gifts with the community, because that's really what it is when we honor one another, is not just everything that you do together, but how you can be strong individuals with your unique gifts, the unique things that you enjoy engaging in, and still come together and be able to share those moments of deep connection. So.
Please stand.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lechadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Happy anniversary. Happy anniversary, Duncan. Please be seated.
So I want to invite you to place your gaze upon the candle flames. If you center on the flames, you may be aware of light that is around all the Yizkor lights. The last day of Passover is also a time of Yizkor and memory. And just let your gaze stare at you can pick one of the lights or you can pick both. And let everything else kind of fade in the back. As you gaze, become aware of your body in space, the contact of your feet on the floor, your bottom on the chair, the distance between the bottom of your spine and the top of your heads. This is just this opportunity to really bring our attention to this moment. Notice the movement of breath as it goes in and out of your body, not needing to breathe differently, but just be aware of this breathing, this body, this light. The first day of creation, God said, "Let there be light." But on the third day of creation, the sun and the moon and all of the bodies of light were created. So what was this light that was on the first day? Somehow this light was something that is not so much with color. That came later. Maybe that light is energy, vibrancy. Some of our mystics say that everything in creation is an expression of this light. Our bodies, Try to imagine your body as being an expression of light, of energy, of radiating all of the heat and awareness in every cell, alive and vibrating, and all the different bodies in the room vibrating and radiating and expressing light. See if you can consider that all the different colors that are present in your vision are seeing different forms of the same light, the same energy. And you are included in that. In our next prayer, we sing about building God's temple with our own awareness, with our own beauty and our own majesty. Just stay with that joy for a moment. Just that real open heart. That joy is not just an emotion, but it's a state of the soul. That there's a aliveness and awakeness to each moment where the response is joy. Just the pure being alive. And from that joy, our hearts are open. There's a willingness to embrace, to say, yes, I am a part of this moment and I rejoice. So each of these 4 words will take us into the Shema. Ahava, love. Rachamim, compassion. Chesed, kindness. And Shalom, wholeness, peace. These are the states of the heart, the open heart. So connect with your breath. Be aware of the movement of breath. Be aware of your body in space. Be aware of the world that's beyond your body. The air that touches your face. And open to the possibility that the energy that is within us, in every cell, in every organ, in every sensation, is the same energy that surrounds us. Molecules of air, atoms, vibrant, alive, sound waves. Feel your own presence in this moment. In the same way that you feel somebody else's presence when they're paying attention to you, you feel their attention, their energy. Allow yourself to feel your own presence as you pay attention to this moment. And be aware of the presence of others in the room. You don't need to have your eyes open to know, to sense in a palpable way the presence that's here. Allow yourself to consider the possibility that everything in our field of experience in this moment, everything, from breath to body to sounds to others, everything is filled with divine presence. There is no presence that is not divine. There is no presence that doesn't come from the very source of awareness and consciousness. When we say the Shema, we are invited to listen to the one presence that radiates through it all, through us, through each other, through everything. As we move into the Shema, see if you can hear and sense the one that is within it all.
Adonai. 'Adonai. 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 ' Shalom.
Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Teilatecha, Ufi Yagid Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Teilatecha, Ufi Yagid Teilatecha.
There's something in the asking for God to open our lips so that we can declare, that we can be an expression of praise. Because even in the asking, there's a recognition that it is that divine presence that fills our voice, our very being, our very aliveness. So allow yourself to just be here with breath, with body, with sounds. Even the images in your mind, thoughts. All of them being part of something that is beyond each and every one of us, something that we partake in, this energy of creation, but we don't own. We think that it's my thoughts, that it's my experience. The way we relate to our moment-to-moment experience is that it's mine. Who is me? I have all kinds of ideas about who I am. But when we really bring our attention so fully into the moment, there just is this, not my experience, just this experience. Who is present? Who is paying attention to this moment? Let yourself sense your very awareness, the very you that is watching all of this happen. It's almost like trying to look at yourself without a mirror. And notice how the one who is watching has no boundary. We can have a thought about where we begin and where we end. But the experience of being here in this moment has no beginning and no end. As we are coming out of this last day of Passover, we're heading into the wilderness like the Israelites. Our entire lives are a wilderness. We have the illusion that things are structured and scheduled until something disrupts it and awakens us to the reality that it is a wilderness. The way that we meet each moment is with a pure heart, an open heart, a willingness to be with what is, to know that we are a part of something so much greater than ourselves. And that we can meet each moment with love and compassion and an open heart.
Create a pure heart in me, Great Spirit. Create a pure heart in me. Create a pure heart in me, Great Spirit. Create a pure heart in me, and renew a true soul within me, and renew a true soul within, and renew a true soul within me, and renew a true soul within. Create a pure heart in me, Great Spirit. Create a pure heart in me. Create a pure heart in me, Great Spirit. Create a pure heart in me, and renew a true soul within me, and renew a true soul within, and renew a true soul within me, and renew a true soul within.
This journey into the wilderness in our tradition is marked by the counting of the Omer. The counting of the Omer is each day from the second day of Passover all the way to the holiday of Shavuot, 49 days, is likened to the Israelites' journey in the wilderness from leaving Egypt to Mount Sinai. And we know that they weren't taken on the direct route. They were taken on a circuitous route that God through Moses, because the experience at Mount Sinai was going to be so profound and so opening that in their slave mentality, they weren't ready to receive it. It would have just blown them open. They were so used to relying on Pharaoh, relying on a person, to be able to open to the reality of God was too much. So they needed a process to grow and to purify and to learn and to be ready. And so that's what this period of time is for each of us as we come around the calendar for Passover to Shavuot. Each week we have an area that we get to focus on. a divine quality that we want to try to embody, to try to live more. This week's, we're culminating the week of chesed, or of kindness, loving kindness, generosity. And each day this week, we've focused on all the different aspects of kindness. Next week, we'll start another quality, gevurah, or setting boundaries, discernment, making decisions. The next week, compassion, creativity, empathy, all these as it goes on. So tonight, we are in the last culmination of this week of loving kindness, Malchut Shebechesed, which can be looked at in a lot of different ways, but I'm going to take the piece that this is the aspect of kindness that is done with dignity. Dignity is a sense of coming to each moment whole, with a sense of integrity, of who I am in the world, and can I bring that to my acts of kindness? When I bring that to my acts of kindness, I'm not giving up on what my own needs are. I'm not doing something that's crossing my own boundaries, but something that is a pure expression of who I am and what I want to give and what I want to share. And so that is the place to focus. The question for all of us is, how do I share kindness with dignity? That's the question for today. So the counting of the Omer, I want to invite you to stand. It's traditionally done standing. We'll say a blessing that ends Al Sfirat HaOmer. Thank you, God. Blessed are you, God, for the counting of the Omer. And then I'll count the day in Hebrew and then in English. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu Al Sfirat HaOmer Hayom Shiv'a Yamim Shehem Shavua Echat LaOmer. Today is the 7th day, which is 1 week of the Omer. You may be seated.
Bless you.
The other thing before we continue with the Aleinu prayer is that this 8th day of Passover in the tradition has this energy or this focus on Mashiach, on Messiah. And there are a lot of different ways that we view this idea in Judaism, but the one that resonates the most for me is that Mashiach is a time in our world when everybody is so clear about the divine reality, about that every person is an expression of the divine image, and all of creation is filled with God, so that we act in ways and we create whole social economic systems that reflect that reality, where each person is treated with that divine respect, and there is space for all voices, all in our diversity and our plurality. So the Aleinu prayer is the prayer that allows us to imagine a world in which there is this Mashiach world. So just take a moment on this 8th day of Passover and as we are getting towards the end of our service, to envision in your mind, what does that world look like? What is that world that we're striving for, that we're praying for, that we're hoping for? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do people act towards each other? What is it like to move in the world with people that have that kind of awareness? And we're asked not only on the 8th day of Passover, but every day to envision that world so that our choices and our steps can move us one closer.
Hey Lord, עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת קדולה ליוצרת ראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שם בנו משפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהן, וכל עלינו ככל עמונה.
In our synagogue family, we are in the Shloshim period, the 30-day period, for Dr. Albert Gordon, the brother of our member Marvin Gordon. If I say the name of your loved ones, whether you're tuning in with us virtually or whether you're here in the chapel, please stand in honor of your connection. Dorothy Baker, Philip Bassel, Mary Bayless Petrin, Ludwig Benheim, Bertha Benheim, Bernice Bloom, Harriet Bosch, Betty Cooper, Philip Diamond, Sidney Diamond, Gabriel Drimmer, Leah Freeman, Morris Friedman, Eric Garcia, Morris Glass, Rose Gold, Carol Grouse, Irene Hafferi, Robert Inslee, Joseph Irani, Sarah Jacobs, Jules Kaplan, Elizabeth Katz, Rita Kaufman, Rebecca Kleiersfeld, Herman Kleiersfeld, Herbert Kramer, Kelly Lee, Louis Jacob Levinson, Bronnie Markovitz, Burton Mendelson, Rodney Moss, Laura Naiman, Fanny Archow, Paula Penkava, Jeanette Pollack, Clara Putzer, George Renkel, Daniel Rosenberg, Donnie Rubin, Sidney Schwartz, Anita Baltimore Schwartz, Florence Schwid, Ann Selbst, Rabbi Zachariah Center, Robert Jean Chapin, Herman Solomon, David Spiegel, Estelle Weiner, Mary Weiss, Abji Wenda, Bertold Wiener, Cecile Wiener, Dr. Miles Zane, Clara Rothman, my father Leland Weider. Anybody else we're saying Kaddish for?
Sherry Wallach.
Thank you.
Sherry Wallach.
You may stand or sit according to your custom for Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, Ve'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute. B'chayechon uvyomechon u'v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'olam olmei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yitalal. Shmei dekudisha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Damiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing.
Hey ho, 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 hey ho. Ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam shalom. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam shalom. Ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu, ojavo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam shalom. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam. Salam shalom. Hey ho, 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 hey ho. Just our voices. Hey oh, hey oh, hey oh, hey oh, hey oh, hey oh.
You may be seated. So here's a little bit of upcoming news. First, we just want to thank you for the incredible generosity of Ellen and Duncan Prince for sponsoring tonight's Soul Spark Shabbat. If you would like to sponsor a Soul Spark Shabbat, help make this kind of service continue to be possible, please speak with Cantor Young or with myself. Details of all that's happening here can be found on our website. In just a moment, we will say Kiddush together, have just a short break there's a Kiddush wine that's outside that you can take a little sip outside, and then we'll be able to come back in to listen to Rabbi Sid Schwartz speaking about reimagining the American synagogue. Tomorrow morning, we'll continue our weekend with Rabbi Sid. We're going to have a 8th day Passover Torah service that will be up in our sanctuary from 9 to 10 a.m. But then here in our chapel at 10 a.m., Rabbi Sid will be leading us in an alternative prayer experience called Prayer Out of the Box, or Davening Out of the Box. You must be in your seat by 10 a.m. because he's going to set up this totally different kind of experience that you won't know what's happening if you don't come right away and be there. So please don't miss this opportunity. It's a rare thing. The special morning program will be followed by a Kosher for Passover community lunch at 1 p.m., generously sponsored and hosted by Wendy and Charlie Lupel. And please join us coming up in a couple of weeks for a memorable night at this year's gala, Golden Age of Television. The auction will be live shortly. Hors d'oeuvres, cocktails, dancing, live auction, online auction, all good stuff. We'll also next week have a wonderful lecture in honor of Yom HaShoah. It's called The Ravine, A Family, a Photograph, and a Holocaust Massacre, revealed with Professor Wendy Lauer in honor of Yom HaShoah. It will be online. It was originally supposed to be in person, but it will be online because Professor Lauer won't be able to be here in person. That's at 7 p.m. And then the community Yom HaShoah observance will be held on Wednesday, April 27th at 7 p.m. at the JCC, and Cantor Young will be featured in that program. And then finally, the following weekend, we have Bee Sisters and Jewish Values in Action is sponsoring an evening after Shabbat services called No Smiling Allowed, Growing Up in Soviet Russia and Other Funny Stories from a Jewish Immigrant, with Julia Bendis on next Friday at 8:15. And then Saturday night, Men's Club will be doing a Winging It with Rabbi Kavod program at 7:30 p.m., also here in the synagogue, with wings and beer and discussion. So.
We'd be remiss to not thank our musicians tonight, Evan and Marcy and Steve, for filling our sacred space with such beautiful music. And another special thank you to Deidre Greenberger, who created this beautiful space with all of the lighting. It takes a village, and we have a pretty incredible village. And we are always happy to welcome more people to our village. So thank you all for adding your voices and your energy to this service tonight.
Amen. Amen. So please stand so we can say Kiddush together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. B'shabbat kodsho v'ahava u'ratzon im kilanu zikaron lema'aseh b'reishit kilu yom tevilah lemikra'ei kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim kivanu acharta v'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodshcha ve'ahava u'ratzon inhaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat le'ayim.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. We'll take just really a 5-minute break. We'll start promptly at 8:15. with our scholars talk. Use the restroom, take a little sip of juice or wine, and be back in your seats.
They're over there. You may want to go there. I'm going to face this way. That's not going to work.
No?
No. No. Because it'll just, shoot, yeah. It'll be fine. I'll be fine.
Do you not need this then?
No.
All right. So we're going to begin, everybody. And thanks for staying on. If you're tuning in online, thanks for staying with us here. It is my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Sid Schwartz. Rabbi Sid is the author of numerous books, including Finding a Spiritual Home, Judaism and Justice, Jewish Megatrends, and he has started and run numerous programs. Panim was a program that he started in Washington, D.C. that brought together Jewish learning with civic responsibility, bringing high school students and teenagers. And then he's gone on to, in many different forms, to train rabbis in leadership and synagogue innovation. I've been, this last couple of years, had the great pleasure to be part of the Clergy Leadership Incubator, which it brings together rabbis from every denomination to get trained in Jewish leadership and synagogue innovation. How many cohorts?
We're now in 5.
Five cohorts of rabbis in 2-year programs. So this has been about 10 years going on. So I'll let him say more, but I'm really, it's an honor to be able to introduce my mentor and teacher and friend, Rabbi Sid Schwartz.
Thank you. Thank you. You can cut this mic. I'm going to use this. Okay, great. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chag Sameach, if you're still doing it. You know, some people do 7 days, some do 8 days. So I know this is a blended community. So we have some 8-dayers, 7-dayers. We have some in-person folks. We have some Zoomers. So we're blending in all different ways. It is a pleasure to be here, and especially, I go way back with Kavod, well before he joined the cohort that he mentioned. This 2-year cohort that I do for rabbis on visionary leadership. Kavod and I interacted in a previous incarnation of Kavod's career and of mine. So we've been friends for a long time, and it's a pleasure to be in your community. And this is not my first rodeo with your synagogue. I was actually supposed to be here 2 years ago, shut down by COVID, but I wound up doing some stuff online during a strategic planning process, which was extremely impressive. And I asked Kavod before I came out here to see the end product, which I just want to commend you. I've worked with many synagogues around strategic planning and mission statements and the like, and you all did an amazing job, and worked with Amy, and I don't know who else was in that project here. Kind of curious. Any other? Yeah, so it was really very, very well done. So it's a pleasure to be now here in person. Also, you know, there's a tradition of a character in the Talmud called Honi Hamagal, who's kind of the Rip Van Winkle of the rabbinic tradition, who falls asleep and wakes up many years later. And COVID has kind of felt like that. We're all kind of just gradually emerging from 2 years of hibernation, which we did not plan and did not count on. And it feels like some lost years. I was in my own shul about a month ago leading services, and a woman came to me and she says, "It was so wonderful to be here. This is the first time I've been here in person in 2 years. What I most missed was the silence that we could do together," which I thought was an interesting kind of notion. Because when you're in a room with 150 people and everyone's quiet in the way that Kavod and the clergy did this evening, it's kind of very powerful. So welcome back out of our hibernation, and it's good to be here in person. So I want to talk a little bit about the future of the American Synagogue. It's been one of my passions. I come to it both as a student, scholar of the American Jewish community and of American synagogues, but also as a practitioner. I'm not an academic. I mean, there are a lot of people who have expertise in fields and write books and studies, and here's the book I wrote about the next stage of the American Synagogue, called Finding a Spiritual Home: How a New Generation of Jews Can Transform the American Synagogue. But I've been the rabbi of 2 different congregations, one outside of Philadelphia, in Meade, Pennsylvania, for 8 years, and then a synagogue that I founded as the founding rabbi in Bethesda, Maryland, where I still have an ongoing relationship as the founding rabbi, although my successor has now been there 25 years, so it's been a long time. But I still have the opportunities to lead services and do projects in the synagogue. I use Adat Shalom as my own laboratory, and it was actually the inspiration for this book, which I'll say more about in a few minutes. So just that's by way of background. Just to give you a bit more bio on me, I grew up in New York. My parents are both survivors of the Shoah. My father left Berlin 2 weeks before Kristallnacht in 1938, came to this country at age 16, and then went back to fight in the European theater in the American Army. My mother actually also escaped the war, but her family went east to pre-state Israel, known as the Yishuv or Palestine at the time, and then they both met in New York eventually. I was sent to an Orthodox yeshiva as a child. I was raised in a fairly Orthodox home, but I grew up as it's called a shul kid. In other words, every Shabbat I walked with my dad to shul, and actually even before I could walk, I would go with him to shul because he'd give me a piggyback ride for the 3/4 of a mile between our house and the synagogue, and we didn't ride in a car on Shabbat. But later on, I made a left-hand turn from Orthodoxy. My uncle was a conservative rabbi, and while some uncles slipped their nephews a copy of Playboy magazine under the table, my uncle slipped me. He knew that I was having trouble with the yeshiva I went to, and I had a lot of issues of that I believe all the stuff that I was taught as a young student in yeshiva from an Orthodox perspective. So he slipped me a copy of Mordechai Kaplan's classic magnum opus called Judaism as a Civilization. For those who know a little bit about it, Mordechai Kaplan was one of the leading Jewish philosophers, thinkers of the 20th century, taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is the seminary of the conservative movement, but was the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. Now, for about 45 years, Reconstructionism was simply a school of thought within the conservative movement, but it broke away, and in 1968, Mordechai Kaplan's son-in-law, Ira Eisenstein, opened a seminary in Philadelphia called the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and with that was born the fourth movement in American Jewish life, essentially. And it's an interesting story, which I won't go into it because it will take me too far afield, but I will say that in the early years of Adat Shalom, the synagogue I founded in 1988, Ira Eisenstein, who had been living in Woodstock, New York, in retirement, moved to the Washington area where his daughter lived. And Ira Eisenstein was the son-in-law of Mordechai Kaplan. Okay, so his daughter was Miriam Eisenstein. She's still alive, and we had the privilege of having Ira Eisenstein as our senior scholar in the early years of Adat Shalom until he passed away. So, interestingly enough, given that background, I did not plan on becoming a rabbi. I'm kind of an accidental rabbi, but it's worked out pretty well. I've really enjoyed. It's been a great privilege to be a rabbi. But I remember in my last year of college, I was planning to go to law school was my idea, and I decided I kind of worked my way through college, running Jewish youth groups and running Jewish summer camps, and I felt like I had some talent there, a gift to kind of explain Judaism to young people, especially given my own challenges with belief as a teenager. But when I wrote my essay to rabbinical school, I said, I will do anything except be a congregational rabbi. I was very enamored of youth work and Jewish summer camps and Hillel, and had a lot of interest in the Jewish community, but the synagogue did not seem to be where I wanted to go. So the God I'm not sure I believe in has a sense of humor. Because in the end, one of my expertise turns out to be the American synagogue, primarily because of a quick story which I'll share with you, and that is when I went to RRC, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, there were a handful of student pulpits in the area, and I was lucky enough to be chosen to be a student rabbi at the synagogue in Media, where I started, and I took the job because it was better than teaching Hebrew school, quite frankly, and it paid a fraction better, but not much, okay? I won't even tell you what I got paid in my first year. And the president of the synagogue who hired me said to me, we have been a little laboratory for students from RC for years because it was a small synagogue. They couldn't afford a full-time rabbi, so it was a marriage of convenience. We were cheap labor. The synagogue didn't have money. A match made in heaven. What can you say? So he says, you're a talented young man. You're not going to be here very long. Your predecessors were here a year or two and then left to take full-time congregations. But while you're here, we only have one request. Your job description is make it interesting and make it fun. I was hired based on that handshake. Okay, no contract, just make it interesting and make it fun. Now, I had spent a decade running youth groups and summer camps, and that was like music to my ears. And so what I started to do at Beth Israel Media is experiment like crazy, because frankly, I felt this, now we're talking, I'm going to date myself now, we're talking about the mid-1970s, okay? Already then, I was pretty clear that the institution of the synagogue was badly flawed, if not broken. And that unless we really shook things up, there'd be no future for the American synagogue. And so I started experimenting with a lot of things that you'll get a taste of tomorrow that I call davening out of the box. And the synagogue, to everyone's surprise, began to grow, even though it had been in decline for more than 2 decades. I started writing up some of those experiments in the pages of the Reconstruction magazine. When I graduated, they invited me to start teaching a course at my rabbinical school called Creating Alternative Communities. And that course, which I taught from 1980 to 83, led to this book, which came out in the year 2000, because ever since those experiments in the late 70s, I've been thinking about there's got to be another way to do synagogue. So what I want to talk to you about tonight is the work I've been doing for more than 25 years in what's called, this is a field, called the Synagogue Transformation Movement. There are, a dozen or so folks who are all friends and colleagues. We work together quite well, who have been trying to help synagogues turn the corner because there's been some dramatic changes in American society and in the Jewish community over the past 30 years. And as is the nature in almost every field of endeavor, not just religion, institutions change very slowly, usually too slowly. And when the customer base or the market of a field is totally voluntary, as it is for synagogues, if the institution doesn't change with the times, the market disappears. And that's what's been happening. So let me give you a couple scary data points and then tell you why I am actually quite bullish on the American synagogue. I think it's time to invest, okay? And I want to make the case why, and then at the end, hopefully, we'll have a chance for you to ask me some questions. So a couple scary stats, which are just part of the reality of what we live in. The national rate of affiliation in houses of worship, not just synagogues now, this is a general thing about trends in America, okay, has gone over the past 25 years, went from about 70% of people who said they were affiliated with a church or a synagogue. It's dropped to 55% in the past 25 years, okay? The Jewish community is well below that number, okay? Jewish community affiliation rate is around 30%, and that's dropped by about 10% over the past 25 years, perhaps more. The last study we've done, that was done of all the members of Reform and conservative synagogues in North America, indicated that only 7% of the membership are age 35 or younger. Now, if you were in business, okay, and you said your market had such a skewed rate of older people and such a small number of younger people, it would be time to sell. Okay? But selling is not an option, okay? We are people, some people have said that Jews are prisoners of hope, okay? Our national anthem is the Hatikva, which means the belief in the future and hope, okay? So we need to be much more optimistic than that. We don't have an option to sell. Now, that's not to say that many people have not walked away from synagogue life. They have. And what you know, if you know anything about the landscape of the American synagogue, is that there's been a tremendous number of synagogues closing or merging or shrinking, okay? It is not atypical for me. I do a lot of traveling, speaking at a lot of synagogues, go to a lot of synagogues that tell me that 10 or 15 years ago they might have had 1,000 families, and now they're at 500. Or they were at 500 and now they're at 200, okay? That's the typical story now. I want to tell you a story about synagogues that are growing today, okay? And they're growing because they're doing some very specific things based on 4 principles that I actually articulated in this book back in the year 2000, and that I've updated to some extent, but for the most part, in some of my books I got some things wrong, but I got a few things right also. And these 4 principles I think have stood the test of time in a sense that I want to talk about them. So just before I get to the 4 principles, I want to give you a 3-minute survey of the 3 stages of the American synagogue. Quick history lesson, okay? So when Jews first come to America, the first stage of the American synagogue is called the immigrant synagogue. I want to use New York as the model because it is kind of the capital of the American Jewish community. So think Lower East Side, people gathering in small rooms that don't even look like synagogues, just to get together for Shabbat or for holidays, and getting together in each other's homes when, God forbid, there's a death or something like that. That's the immigrant synagogue. There's no staff, there's no rabbi. They simply do Jewish, okay, the way they knew it in Europe. And the members of the immigrant synagogue are, not a trick question, starts with an I, are immigrants, exactly. They are immigrants. They're not American. They're European. And because they're European, they come with a, with all the baggage of knowing traditional Judaism, okay? Although many of those traditional Jews are also working 7 days a week, including Shabbat. Okay, it's kind of this oddity where Jews who actually want to pray will take out an hour or 2 out, for services, but then they're going to work because they're trying to put food on the table for their families and for the future. The second stage of the American synagogue is called the ethnic synagogue. Again, using New York as the example, think about the boroughs. Jews are now moved from Lower East Side to Brooklyn and the Bronx and Queens, still part of New York City proper, but these are the boroughs. Now they might have a modest building. They might be able to hire a rabbi, many still European trained, okay? So not very familiar with America, but that's now the ethnic synagogue, okay? The neighborhoods are still predominantly majority Jewish, okay? Comes World War II, we get to the third stage of the American synagogue. Jews now move from Brooklyn and Queens out to Long Island, from the Bronx into Westchester, from Manhattan into New Jersey. Now they're in suburbia. For the first time, Jews are living in neighborhoods that are not majority Jewish. It's a new phenomenon. They're now in the American suburbs, so to speak, and they build synagogues that attempt to replicate the Protestant and Catholic churches in the neighborhoods. Having a faith community and a building is very American. And don't mistake building a synagogue and being a member of the synagogue with piety. Not the same thing. It is very American in the same way that, every politician puts a flag on their lapel and says, God bless America, right? There's serious lip service paid to religion in America, even as Americans are less and less religious. But affiliation is important, and the primary function of that third stage of the American synagogue, which is called the synagogue center, is to help Jews acculturate into America. That's the primary goal. And the fact is that the synagogue center, which dot the landscape even today, when you think about the synagogues that you know all around the country, okay, those synagogues in suburbia all got created in the 50s and 60s, built during that time, okay? For the most part, the form of Judaism offered there was primarily for the children. And the term that's used somewhat pejoratively is what was delivered was pediatric Judaism. Simple, don't make it too serious, don't make it too demanding, okay? Because the fact of the matter is adults joined for their children to have some nominal Jewish education and get what became the terminal degree of Jewish life, the bar or bat mitzvah. And terminal on 2 levels. Terminal because for a lot of young people, it's the last time they're in synagogue. It's like, thank you, Rabbi, for my bar mitzvah, for my bat mitzvah, I'm out of here, okay? And terminal on a macro level, because when you multiply that exponentially, it signals the fact that what is the Jewish future if the last day that a young person is in a Jewish institution was their bar mitzvah. It doesn't signal good things. And by the way, in my book, I interviewed many people who grew up in those synagogue centers who tell stories about their childhood if they were affiliated in quite unflattering ways. And when they talk about what they're looking for right now, they're saying they're looking for anything but the kind of synagogue they grew up in, being those synagogue centers. And so I want to suggest, and with this I'm going to get to the contemporary Jewish world, that we're now in a transition moment. Many Jews who grew up in those synagogue centers have left Jewish life, but other young Jews who actually grew up even later are actually looking for things that synagogues can and should be providing, and this comes some of the good news. Now, if the first stage of this, so quick review, it might have taken more than 3 minutes, it might have been 5, but immigrant synagogue, ethnic synagogue, synagogue center, Lower East Side, boroughs, suburbs. The fourth stage, I like to call the synagogue community, or what I prefer today to call a covenantal community. Covenantal from the Hebrew word brit, okay, like brit milah is a circumcision, but brit is the Hebrew word in the Bible that tells us about the relationship between God and the Jewish people that's forged at Mount Sinai. If you believe Exodus chapter 19, and you may not, but the core story, some would call it the mythic beginning of the Jewish people, is when God says to the Jewish people, if you keep these commandments, 10 commandments and everything that comes from it, then you will be my cherished people and the promised land will be yours. That's the original deal, which is called a covenant or a brit between God and the Jewish people. Now, however much you believe or don't believe that Exodus 19 story, it is the foundational story of the Jewish people. And I love the word covenant in the same way I love the word brit, because what is needed today are synagogues that are quite different than the synagogue centers that were created in the 50s and 60s, where many of you might have been raised, and where I was raised as well. Okay? So I want to talk about 4 principles that I've been training congregations and rabbis with for the past 25 years, which I think are the key to how synagogues can get a new lease on life and actually provide what I believe is desperately needed in America today. And for each of those principles, I'll give you at least one example of synagogues that have embodied those principles and the result. Principle number 1, and this relates to how I first came to know Temple Bethel. Number 1 is synagogues that are mission-driven and program-aligned. Mission-driven and program-aligned. Now, I wanted, on each of these 4 principles, I'm going to talk about the contrast between the synagogue center, the suburban synagogue centers of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and what's happening today. When my parents moved from the Bronx to Long Island, it wasn't an option about whether they were going to join a synagogue. Okay? In other words, for them, they couldn't think of any other way to navigate the American setting as European-born Jews who were fairly traditional, but through the intermediary agency of the synagogue. Okay? So it was, you can say it's voluntary, but it really wasn't for that generation. And even for my generation, it starts asking that question about do we need a synagogue or not. The idea of the synagogue being mission-driven would have been laughable 25 years ago. Because you'd say, what do you mean a mission? The mission, we have the Torah. We have mitzvot. That's what we're all about. Okay? You're Jewish. You believe in the Torah. You observe Jewish life. That's what it's all about. But today, people who are interested in joining need to ask the question, not what is Judaism, but why is Judaism? Why be Jewish at all? In other words, what is the value proposition today? If my parents' generation needed synagogues to acculturate, we've won that game. We may even play that game too well. We've acculturated so well that we've lost a large percentage of people who even want to identify as Jews, okay? So we no longer need the synagogue to acculturate or to assimilate. The only reason people might seek out the synagogue is to say, will this experience bring greater value to my life? Will I feel that I'm more of a fully actualized human being because I'm part of this, let's call it a faith community, okay, or a spiritual community? And that's the question. And one way to do that is to get people who are in communities to say, what is our mission? What are we here for? What is our mandate? What are we offering that can't be available anywhere else? And that's a big question, okay? You may know one of the things that I talk about in my book, Finding a Spiritual Home, is that many of the Jews who were raised in those suburban synagogue centers chose not to join synagogues, but actually populated the great explosion of interest in spirituality in America during the 90s, early 2000s, and beyond, okay? You look at a whole range of alternative spiritual experiences, whether it's Eastern religions, ashrams, human potential movements, mass movements like Aston, Lifespring, all those things, heavily populated by Jews. There's a book written by Tony Schwartz, no relationship, was a writer for the New York Times. The book was called What Really Matters. And the book came out in the early 90s, and he essentially explores all these alternative spiritual spaces in America. And in a footnote that I found on page 170-something, okay, the footnote says, isn't it odd, he's in his fifth, spiritual community. He says, once again, the majority of the people here are Jewish. And he doesn't explain it. It's just he's Jewish. It strikes him as odd. He notes it in a footnote. It gets all of 2 lines in a 300-page book, okay? But Tony Schwartz stumbles onto something that's actually quite interesting. I had a similar experience, by the way. When we started Adat Shalom back in 1988, I had a handful of people who were practitioners of Siddha Yoga. Anyone familiar with Siddha Yoga? And they were going to an ashram with the guru in the Catskills. Okay, now this is also a great irony, right? The Catskills were the place where all the Jews from New York used to go in the summer, right, to vacation. Most of those Jewish resorts are out of business today, okay? They were all kosher and whatever else, but mostly out of business. A lot of them have become ashrams, and there's many Jews there today as there were back in the 50s and 60s. They're just there for a different purpose, and there's no kosher menu, but it's all vegan. Don't worry about it, okay? So, this is the life strange story, right? Anyway, about a half dozen people who were interested in Adat Shalom in the early days as we were creating the community said, we are serious practitioners of Siddha Yoga. We're very interested in what you're creating here as a spiritual community and the things. We've come to a few services, we've heard you speak, whatever else, but we're going to continue to practice Siddha Yoga, and we don't want to come here and create a problem. So if you, Rabbi Sid, don't want us here, we won't come. And I said to them quite honestly, I said, I don't know enough about Siddha Yoga to say no. We'd love to have you here, and hopefully you'll learn some things from me about Judaism, and I'll learn some things from you about Siddha Yoga, which is what had happened. About 2 years later, I went during a summer, I went to spend a few days at the Siddha Yoga ashram, okay? Super interesting experience for me, okay? Here again, I experienced what Tony Schwartz experienced. Like, everywhere I looked, there were Jews. And when I spoke to the assistant to the guru, and I said, I'm a rabbi, and I came here because some members of my synagogue are part of this community and come here quite regularly. And he says to me, would you like to lead a Shabbat service? I didn't know I was going there to do a gig, But he says, there would be a lot of interest if you did a service here because there's so many Jews who are trying to find a spiritual path, okay? Now, why do I tell you the story? I think today when you see how much Jews that Jews are seekers. They've really been looking for ways, a path to make life more enriching, more fulfilling, okay? I think the synagogues that they might be part of need to be crystal clear about what they're in business to do. What is the mandate? What is going to happen in this spiritual community that you cannot get anywhere else? And that's where a synagogue being mission-driven is all about. And furthermore, I think synagogues, just like companies, if anyone is in business or read business books, is very clear. Companies that are very clear about their mission statement and their values are more successful. Bottom line, they can show it in profitability because everyone in the system, if they are well trained and oriented towards the mission, they align in their work much better. And what's true in business is doubly, if not triply true, in spiritual communities that are voluntary. Having a clear mission, and then Amy and I just had a brief conversation in the hallway. The challenge now is how do we get everyone to kind of align with all this great work you did around the mission statement so that we're all rowing in the same direction. And once you're clear about that, it's much easier to attract people to come to your community. I'll give you one example of a beautiful, a great example of a super program-aligned community, Beth Elohim. It's a large Reform congregation in Brooklyn. The rabbi is Rachel Timoner, who used to be out here on the West Coast. Some of you may know her name. I think she was in L.A. Beth Elohim is hyper-focused on their social action Tikkun Olam program. And they have, at this point in time, more than a dozen groups that mobilize around certain issues, whether it's immigrant rights or LGBTQI rights or Israel-Palestine or refugees. And in each of those areas, they have very sophisticated approaches to being activists where they work with members of Congress, city officials and the like to advance their agenda. And many people come to Beth Elohim because if they want to be politically engaged, Beth Elohim is one of the best places to do that in, okay? People who are public officials know that if they want to find an audience of people who are educated, involved, active, and will vote accordingly, they go to Beth Elohim. So this becomes kind of their signature, okay? Now, another synagogue that might be in Brooklyn as well may choose to focus on something else. They may be a prayer spiritual community, or they may be a community that does a lot of direct service work as opposed to political work. Beth Elohim has decided that they want to stake their reputation and their mission around their social action program. A second example I'll give is my own community. In the first early years, we every year, did I bring it? Yeah, I did, yeah. So if you talk to me afterwards, we worked on creating a statement of principles which had about 9 subheads, okay? For each year following this passage of the Statement of Principles, we spent an entire year studying that particular principle, and what emerged were guidelines that were written by members of the community. So we had guidelines for Shabbat, for tzedakah, for what we called avodah, which is the Hebrew word for service and participation, for gemilut chesed, essentially helping people in times of need, and tikkun olam. And each of these processes involved hundreds of person hours of study, of learning, drafting and redrafting, setting out for ratification and conversation. And then, in addition to which, in terms of program aligned, at the end of each year at the annual meeting, I would actually talk about our success and or failure during the year along those guidelines. And I would actually give grades out and say, we get an A in Tikkun Olam and we get a C in Gimel Chesed. And we talked about where we've got to do some more work in the coming year. So if you take your mission statement seriously, your strategic planning process seriously, and your guidelines seriously, everyone understands that that's how we align as a spiritual community and essentially all move in the same direction to create something very special. Second principle is what I call maximalist Judaism. From the word maximum, okay? Another way of calling it authentic Judaism. This is, again, a dramatic break from the culture or the ethos of the synagogue center of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. What was featured in the synagogue centers was Judaism light. Don't make it too complicated. Don't make it too demanding. We have other agendas in our lives. Today, Jews who are interested in finding a more serious spiritual path do not want Jewish light. It's what explains how it is that even non-observant people are enamored of Chabad. Like, how do you explain the success of Chabad, Lubavitchers, okay? Because it smacks of authenticity, okay? Now, we can critique what's that all about, why relatively non-observant Jews are spending more money supporting Chabad than anything else, but it's a desire for authenticity. And furthermore, it's also a function of a Jewish community today that has been fully accepted into America. You know, there was a study done, this may surprise you, but it's kind of an interesting little anecdote. There's a book called American Grace, which is a study of American religion, done by David Campbell and Robert Putnam are the authors. And in that book, they survey Americans about a lot of things, including the religions that Americans most admire. Do you know that Judaism is the most admired religion in America? Not by Jews, by non-Jews, okay? That's, I mean, you know, Jews say, okay, you know, nah, you know, I'm doing my Larry David impersonation. Nah, not really, I'm not going to. Okay, but when you survey Americans, they say, what religion do you most admire? Judaism comes out on top. So there's something very precious that we take for granted as Jews, which is unfortunate, okay? But the point is that in terms of being accepted in America, we've won that battle for better or for worse. That's a whole debate, talk for another time, okay? Today, the issue is not can we use the synagogue as a way to acculturate into America. It's can we, there's something wrong with America if you haven't noticed, okay? There's a deep malaise, a deep, I think, spiritual sickness in America. We're a troubled country, a troubled society right now, okay? To find a community that has its values together, that's clear about what's right and what's wrong, what's truth and what's lie, okay? That is not, you used to take it for granted saying like, well, that's America. Well, guess what? It's not America anymore. And so a community that is clear about its values has great, great appeal to in America today, okay? And that's where maximalist Judaism comes in, okay? The other thing about synagogues that are really understanding this well is the following. If you were to create a brochure for a synagogue that was founded in 1950 and had its heyday in 1965, let's say, okay, or 1970, and has been in decline ever since, on the cover of the brochure would be a heterosexual couple with 2 or 3 kids and a dog in a station wagon, and they'd be white, okay? That was your typical member of an American synagogue, okay, a synagogue center. But here's the question that we are now asking. It's taken us a little bit too long to get there. Who are the Jews who are not there? Who's not on the brochure? Who doesn't feel that they belong? And the list is long. Single, elderly, people who are not white collar, like the Jewish plumber, okay? LGBTQ, divorced, mentally ill, differently abled. The list is very, very long. And if you haven't noticed, the heterosexual family couple without a divorce is now under 50% in America, okay? And so, and now of course there's more attention to Jews of color and Sephardi Jews. Have you heard the term Ashkenormativity? Have you used that term here, Kavod? Have you ever used that? Okay, so even the notion of that Ashkenazi Judaism, which is European Judaism, is the standard, even that is kind of like, no. I mean, Los Angeles is known for its Iraqi and Persian community, okay? So Judaism is a very multi-dimensional phenomenon, okay? And synagogues have to represent that diversity. But we've done a horrible job of making Jews who are not normative in the 1975 notion feel comfortable, okay? A story I tell sometimes is a true story. I was at a synagogue in Cleveland, and a woman comes up to me and tells me the story. I gave it a talk there, I did this weekend. And she comes up to me, she goes, she's from a Sephardic family from Morocco. So she's got a dark complexion. And she goes back, 7 generations of rabbis in her family. Really one of the more prominent Moroccan Jewish families. And 2 generations ago, her grandfather came to America, okay? Looks dark. She says one year, she went into the ladies' room on the high holidays, and one of the people who was European looks at her and says, we need more paper towels. Based on the pigmentation of her skin. Okay? Now, here again, the person who asked the paper towels meant no offense. But this is what's called microaggressions, right? They're all over the place. We have not created welcoming communities for the many Jews who actually want to be in community. And we have a lot of work to do there, a lot of work. So the idea of the maximalist Judaism is breaking up a club because the synagogue centers were suffocatingly homogeneous. They were made of Jews who looked alike and thought alike and acted alike and said, what is she wearing? What is he wearing? I got to wear the same thing? No, it doesn't work anymore. Not at all, okay? In fact, today, there's a recognition, let's honor each person for the uniqueness that they bring, okay? And the they here now has double entendre, right? Both they collectively, but also someone who's not even, of one gender or the other, but they go by they, okay? That too is something that we need to open our communities and our minds around. An example of maximalist Judaism, a great example I'd like to use is a group called the Kavanah Cooperative in Seattle. Rachel Nussbaum was the rabbi. I like to use this as an example because what Rachel did is she created a community. Again, she founded it. Anyone know the community? Ever been there? No? She actually used the model of a food co-op to build her synagogue. Now, in a food co-op, has anyone been part of a food co-op? In other words, if you want to buy there, you need to give a certain number of hours a month in to work there, okay? And then you get the privileges of being in the co-op. She used the same principle to build her synagogue, okay? If you want to be in the synagogue, there's a certain expectation about how many hours you volunteer your time or show up for things. You can't be an absentee member. Now, most synagogues in America can tell stories about the fact that they have got 500 households on their membership rolls, and they see maybe 10% of them during the year on a regular basis. That's fairly typical. Well, from the very get-go, Rachel said that's not the way this is going to roll here, okay? Now, can you come as a guest? For sure. But there's a certain status and station to being a chaver, a member, a partner at the Kavanah Cooperative, and people actually vie for getting that standard, okay? And what she's proven, and by the way, we had much of the same ethos at Adat Shalom back in Bethesda, where one time, I love telling the story, a woman came up to me at a community event once, and she said to me the following, I swear I'm not making this up. She says, if I was more serious about my Judaism, I would join Adat Shalom. One of the nicest compliments I've ever gotten. Because what it told me is that we had a reputation in the community as the place for serious Jews. It doesn't mean we don't laugh a lot. It just means we're serious about our Judaism, okay? And that's what more and more people want these days. So that's the second principle. Third principle. How am I doing time-wise? 2 more principles, and then we'll take some Q&A, okay? Everyone still with me? Good? I can skip 3 and 4. No? Okay, let me do 3 and 4. Because I want to make sure we have time for some Q&A, okay? The third principle is creating an empowered and regenerating organizational culture. So what does that mean? A lot of words, good Scrabble words, okay? But empowerment essentially means is that instead of, again, the contrast with the synagogue center, where the rabbi was, king, priest, and magician, all in one, hocus pocus, you're a bar mitzvah, hocus pocus, you're married, and there's a bag of tricks the rabbis learn and nobody else knows what they are, so everyone's saying, okay, rabbi, do me, do your Jewish thing to me, right? Like that's why we pay you, right? And by the way, it created a very unfortunate culture where you had non-observant Jews, non-attending Jews, non-serious Jews saying that the rabbi has got to do all the mitzvot for the community. That's why we hired you, Rabbi. Great story told by Rabbi Harold Showeis of blessed memory, who was a rabbi of Valley Beth Shalom until he passed away a few years ago. Was one of my mentors, really one of the great rabbis of America. He tells a story about going to visit a member of his shul who had a heart attack and was in the hospital. He goes there, visits her, and the woman says to him, she's in her 80s, she goes, Rabbi Showeis, I really appreciate that you're here. She goes, but I've been a member of Valley Beth Shalom for 45 years. She goes, I've been here a week, and I haven't gotten a call from one person from the synagogue. Your visit doesn't matter all that much to me. Where's all the people that I've been with and cared about all these years? And that's the story that Rabbi Showeis told about why he created a para-rabbinic program. And VBS came to be known for this. It started about 25 years ago, where actually each year he would train 20 people to do all the things that people thought they were subcontracting to the rabbi. And Rabbi Shulai says, no, 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 no. Helping lead a Shiva minyan, visiting the sick, bringing meals to someone who's bedridden, taking a mother who's on bed rest because she got an at-risk pregnancy and driving her kids to school. The list is long. These are all things that we need to do for each other if we are a serious community here, okay? And over the course of many years, he trained dozens and dozens of members to say, I'm not the mitzvah machine here. As Jews, you need to do the mitzvot, okay? So that's the tip of the iceberg. And the fact of the matter is, when you see thriving communities, Jewish communities in America, you see how much is now generated from the bottom up and not the top down. You had the Chavurah movement in the 70s, but now you have the new iteration of the Chavurah movement is the independent minyan movement, okay? There are over 100 independent minyanim around the country, no rabbi, no cantor, oftentimes no building. They're meeting in each other's apartments or homes, okay? And they're thriving, and they're booming, and they're young. Remember the data point I gave you at the opening? Under 7% of members of synagogues are under 35. You want to know where the 35 and under are? In the independent minyanim. Because today, there are a lot of negative things about internet culture. Don't get me started. But among the positive things is that we have democratized knowledge and know-how, okay? And so a lot of the things that it takes to be a knowledgeable, participating member of the Jewish community can be accessed without going to rabbinical school, okay? I'm not looking to put any rabbis out of business because there's plenty for rabbis to do. But the fact of the matter is we need to push the doing of Judaism down to Jews and not subcontract it out to the rabbis. That does not create an empowered culture. And there are a lot of examples of that. My good buddy who's on the national mentor team for CLE, the program that Kavod graduated from a few months ago, is Michael Wasserman, who's in Scottsdale, Arizona. He started his own shul called the New Shul. By the way, that's another thing. It's about authenticity. All these places are calling themselves shul, which is a European term, okay? Even the juxtaposition of New Shul, okay? And in New York, they have something called the Lab Shul. Okay, people want that notion of what's authentic. But in Michael's Lab Shul, New Shul, he's made it very clear that he's not been hired to do Judaism for anyone else. And whether it's the prayer team or the Tikkun Olam team or the Chesed team, it's all coming from the bottom up, okay? It's kind of a paraphrase of the famous line from JFK's inaugural address. You know, ask not what you can do, what your synagogue can do for you, but what you can do for your synagogue, okay? Pushing it down to the bottom. Fourth and finally, I call it the Kedusha factor, okay? And that is to understand Judaism not as a bunch of rules that you've got to do, and if you don't do them, you're going to, you won't go to heaven or something like that, okay? I don't believe that. Maybe you do. If you do, fine, okay? But I like to describe Judaism as a toolkit to advance human flourishing. And when I meet someone who says to me, I wasn't raised in a Jewish home, I didn't have a bar mitzvah, but I've read some things about Judaism and I'm really interested, can I be part of this community? And I say to them, Judaism is this toolkit of how do you advance human flourishing, and welcome to our toolkit. I'm happy to give you some training in how to access that toolkit. That's really the key. And the fact is that people are desperate to find settings in which they can feel some sense of meaning. We have an epidemic of loneliness in America right now, which has been exacerbated by internet culture, okay? You know the book by A.J. Jacobs where he said, The Year of Living Alone? A.J. Jacobs is this very, best-selling author out of New York, and he did a book called The Year of Living Biblically, but he also did A Year of Living Alone, where he didn't see anyone else. This was pre-COVID, by the way, when it was unique. Now everyone had a year living alone, right? But you spend your whole life just in front of a computer, okay? It can be done. And we know today that people do not have meaningful relationships, okay? So the idea of spirituality is essentially connectivity, both vertically to some greater power in the universe, which we may not understand, some mystery of the universe, and horizontally to one another in community. And that community works when it has a set of values that we can share and find common purpose in. I love, just to give you, I mentioned Lab Shul, I want to just give you some language about how we talk about Judaism. The Lab Shul, which is led by a good friend of mine, Amichai Lau Levi in New York, this is their catchphrase. I love this. I'm going to read it for you. Lab Shul is artist-driven, everybody-friendly, God-optional, pop-up experimental community for sacred Jewish gatherings. Now, a little hard to memorize. You got to try 3 times to get it right. But every phrase there is a trigger for what people are looking for today. Okay, experimental, pop-up, God-optional. Okay, you know how many Jews get hung up on the G word? Some people are desperate to talk about God, and some people say the second I hear the G word, I shut down and I'm out the door. Okay, so to just say God-optional, say, wow, I wonder what that means. It's a synagogue that's God-optional. Well, does that mean they're atheists? No, not necessarily. It just means it's an open question. And actually, you know the Hebrew phrase for someone who is a born-again Jew? What do we call a born-again Jew? Baal Tshuva. The Hebrew it's a kind of anglicized version of it. Means the one who has the answers is a Baal Tshuva. Okay? But the reality is now, I've met a few Baalei Tshuva in my time, okay? Very interesting folk. But frankly, there are more Jews today who are Baalei She'elot, who are bearers of questions. And they feel that if they have too many questions, they don't belong in a synagogue because somehow there's an expectation that you've got to come in and stand up and salute when the rabbi says, God, Torah, Israel. Yes, sir, Rabbi. No, okay? Today, we need to telegraph in very clear ways that synagogues are places that welcome Jews with questions. And God-optional telegraphs the fact that, yeah, it's a conversation. Let's have the conversation together because we're all struggling with that. This goes back more than a decade. After Mother Teresa died, they published a book of her writings. And people were shocked. Mother Teresa, everyone knows, of course, worked in the slums of Calcutta, and kind of the paragon of an angel of mercy, so to speak, working with lepers and sick people and dying people and whatever else, and a paragon of piety. In her essays that got published posthumously, she talked about the fact that every day she questioned whether she believed in God. So if you can be a Mother Teresa and every day say, I don't know if I believe in God, but I'm going to go out and do the work that the God I'm not sure I believe in would have me do, that's what we're going for here. That's what we're going for here. And not expect people to stand up and salute because, I've said something from the catechism of Judaism. One other kind of phrase, again, from down the road, how many of you have been to Ikar, where Sharon Brous is the rabbi? They've done an amazing job there. Here again, they do great work with language, okay? Listen to something that I took off one of Sharon's brochures, okay? IKAR, a synagogue in Los Angeles led by Sharon Brous. Again, these are all synagogues we give you examples of that are growing by leaps and bounds with many young people. So here's some language. I want to give you language from one of her brochures, from Ikar's brochure. Our tradition is to power down on Shabbat because sometimes you have to go off the grid to make room for something holy. Now that is as a contemporary way of talking about Shabbat as you can, it's not like, there are 36 prohibited activities on Shabbat, okay? Anyone I find shearing a sheep tomorrow is in big trouble because that's one of the 36 prohibited activities, okay? So instead of my standing up here wagging a finger about the 36 prohibited activities, say, some days you got to get off the grid to make room for something holy, okay? You all know about South by Southwest, very hip festival, music arts festival that happens in Austin every year. They now have a table that started, 7, 8 years ago and now is super popular, run by a group called Reboot, which is all about something called Shabbat Unplugged, okay? And they have something called the Sabbath Manifesto. Look it up when you go home. Look up Sabbath Manifesto by Reboot. and you will find 10 principles of Shabbat which are written in total secular language, okay? But essentially trying to get people towards a day of rest. You know, light candles, have a glass of wine, have a nice dinner. Right? Take a walk with a friend, okay? Don't open your computer. I mean, 3 simple things, okay? This is not about like, you better do this because God wants you to. It's just about like, we need a day to regenerate because we're driving ourselves into the ground and our society is crumbling around us, okay? So this is the way to kind of advance human flourishing. And synagogues that are essentially, I mean, the end of what I want to say here with you is that synagogues that have kind of taken these principles and used them to build community around it are now in flourishing mode, where synagogues that are still using their playbook from the synagogue center from the post-World War era are shrinking and dying and closing. And I think that's the recipe for the future. The last thing I'll say, well, with this I'll close. What's the Hebrew word for synagogue? Shul is a Yiddish word, but in Hebrew it's a Beit Knesset, okay? Now literally Beit Knesset means a house of gathering. So here's the way that I like to put it. People know Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone? Bowling Alone is a book, a Harvard professor named Robert Putnam wrote a book that is important reading called Bowling Alone, in which he argues the fact that among the problems of America is that we have lost the public square. We have lost a place where we can come together, people from different backgrounds, ideologies, races, religions, and talk about the common good. We don't do things together anymore. We all are, balkanized, separated, okay? Now, he uses bowling leagues as a metaphor. Now, among the things that keep me up at night, is not the decline of bowling leagues in America. I don't lose sleep over that at all, okay? But it's a metaphor, because what he says is that 30, 40 years ago, everyone bowled in leagues. Now, everybody bowls alone, okay? On a larger scale, bowling leagues aside, this is the problem in America. And what he says is, what we need is to invest in what's called social capital. Social capital, which is essentially a way, if you are in business, you need venture capital to grow your business. If you want to create a thriving community, you need social capital, people who are going to invest in each other, which is essentially what a covenant of community is all about. You're investing in a mission and in each other. It's as simple as that. And so I like to translate Beit Knesset not as house of gathering, but a factory for the generation of Jewish social capital. We come to synagogue at a place to get clarity on our mission, where we're going as a group, and our commitment to one another in times of joy, times of sorrow, and everything in between. And if we can do that and do that well, we can create a revival of the American synagogue that we will all cherish. Thank you. So I'd love to take any questions you've got. Yeah, please. Say your name so I know who you are.
My name is Ben. Rabbi, thank you very much for your presentation. 18 years ago, you wrote an article partially entitled Full the Eulogy. And in that article, on the very first page, or on the second page, I forget exactly, you were very optimistic 18 years ago about this, what you call renewal, and I forget what you suggested, Renaissance.
Huh?
Are you as optimistic today as you were 18 years ago when you wrote that article? And you identified some areas that were problematic, but you've done that today as well. Are you more optimistic now than you were then?
Yeah, I always get nervous when someone quotes an article of mine from 20 years ago. Like, first of all, I have to remember if I wrote that, okay, is the first thing. And I got to remember what I wrote. And then third, I got to remember, I have to know well enough to know whether I still believe it. So that's the challenge on 3 levels. I remember the article, it was mine, I still believe it, and I'll say this as an add-on, okay? So it's a word about this book, okay? And I'm not trying to sell the book, but you might find it interesting to read. When I stepped down from being the rabbi of Adat Shalom, I knew we had done something very unique, because we created the community to attract 2 kinds of Jews that were not comfortable in most synagogues: seekers and skeptics. That was our clientele. Skeptics were people who wanted to say, like, I'm not sure I believe in God, but I want Jewish community. And seekers were people who were going to ashrams and everything else, like I told you before, and said, the synagogue I was raised in or that my friend was raised in doesn't offer me anything that's spiritually meaningful, okay? And we attracted a lot of them. So I knew that we had created in our community, 80% of our members in the first 10 years would say they had never intended to belong to any synagogue ever in their lives. And they were members of the community. So when I went to do the book, I decided that I didn't want to just write about Adat Shalom. I wanted to say, is this happening elsewhere? So I wanted to profile one synagogue from each movement, mine being Reconstructionist. And so the 4 synagogues that are profiled here are Beth El Sudbury, where Larry Kushner was the rabbi in Sudbury, Massachusetts. B'nai Jeshurun was a conservative synagogue in Manhattan where Marshall Meyer revived the synagogue. And a synagogue in Riverdale, Orthodox, called the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. Okay. The fact is, it took me some time to find those 4 synagogues because I visited probably 15 or so before I found the 4 I wanted to profile that were close to what we had done at Adat Shalom. And among the conclusions of the book is that denominations today have less and less meaning. 50 years ago, it was all about denominations, okay? Today, most people who are serious about Judaism could care less. And by the way, the folks in New York know it also, but they don't want to admit to it because there are too many jobs at stake. So they perpetuate all the things that the movements do. But the fact of the matter is the most dynamic synagogues in America today do not have denominational labels. Those that had them got rid of them because they didn't want to be only open for people who are looking for reform, conservative, orthodox, reconstruction. Even the Reconstruction movement, I think, is problematic, okay? So most of the synagogues now are called post-denominational. That's the direction. But the direct answer to your question is this. So in the mid-90s, I spent a few years trying to find 4 synagogues to profile. Really 3, because I knew I was going to do my own, okay? Today, I could easily identify 35 to 50 synagogues that I could profile that are kind of on that page, and it's growing by and the reason it's growing is because the evidence, what's the expression? The proof is in the pudding, right? You look at synagogues that are still using the playbook from the 1950s and 60s are shrinking and dying and closing. The ones that have thrown out that playbook and kind of reinvented what it is to create a spiritual community are thriving and flourishing. So the fact that there are so many more today than there were 25 years ago, you're damn right I'm optimistic. It's very exciting. Now, here's the problem, and this is where I'm spending my time right now. Seminaries are still training rabbis for the old paradigm. It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, these seminaries cost tens of millions of dollars to run, okay? And they're still using the old playbook. Like, hello. So the program that Kavod was in is a 2-year professional development program for rabbis who've been in the field for at least 5 years and not more than 15 to essentially train them in a new way of thinking about the rabbinate, okay? But I am quite optimistic, yes. And I'm excited about, in fact, if anyone's interested in seeing exciting stuff, I edit a blog that comes out monthly called On Synagogue Innovation. And they're on the website of CLI, cliforum.org if you want to look at it. You can sign up. It doesn't cost you any money, okay? There are easily 75 articles about the most interesting, exciting things happening in synagogue life today in North America, okay? We publish every month because there's so much going on. It's one of the great joys of my life to kind of like identify all these cool things happening and publish it so, you know, synagogues that are still stuck or feel themselves, you know, losing ground have a place to go for some new ideas. You can find it on cliforum.org. Okay? Rabbi Kavod will give you the link, okay? And you'll get it once a month. First of every month comes out. Please. Your name is? Arthur. You got to come tomorrow morning because I'm telling you a story about a king tomorrow, okay?
I can move over a little bit. You mentioned missions. Can you give me 5 examples of different missions in different synagogues that are on your success category?
Well, I haven't memorized the missions, Okay? No, well, Amy, do you got your, I'm actually carrying your synagogue's mission statement. That's the best one for me to read. It's, yeah, I can't give you that off the top of my head. I mean, but the fact of the matter is, here's what's important. The process is more important than the document, okay? To engage dozens, if not more, of people in a community and saying, like, what are we here for? What do we want to create together, okay? That's the value. The number of hours spent in creating a mission statement or a strategic plan is really where it comes. Now, the follow-up is also important because I can't tell you how many synagogues, call me up and say, Rabbi, would you come and do some consulting work with our synagogue? We're in trouble, okay? So one of the first things I say to the person who calls me, usually the rabbi, but sometimes the synagogue president, I'll say, do you have a mission statement? And they'll say, yes. I said, can you send it to me? They'll say, I've got to find it. I mean, they don't know where it is. Like, I know we did one 7 years ago, but we haven't used it for a long time. So if you just spend the time and then put it in a drawer somewhere, it doesn't do anyone any good, okay? So it needs to be an active document. That's why I gave the example that in my own synagogue, I would hold it up every year and say, here's our mission statement. We've all ratified it. Here's the date, okay? Here's the report card. Here's how we did. And I made it kind of campy, okay? Like, people, like, when you're in grade school, you're anxious about the report card and bringing it home to mom and dad, whatever else. So, like, people came and say, like, I'm a grown-up. Why am I nervous about what Rabbi Sid's grade's going to give us? But, oh, my God, we got an A, So, make it light. And the other thing, again, I'll do a little commercial for tomorrow morning. Synagogue's got to be fun. We're going to have a lot of fun tomorrow morning, and we're going to go deep also. So I want to invite you to be part of this diving out of the box experience because, prayer should be fun. It should be something that lets you go deep and also enjoy yourself. And you walk out and you're like lighter on your feet because you were there. That's the whole idea. So you can, if you're interested, you can go to websites of synagogues and look for their mission statements. And by the way, that will also tell you something because some synagogues will lead with it and some synagogues don't have it, okay? I do think that it's becoming more and more popular, primarily because, and this is so ironic, because it became popular in the business community. All these best-selling business books all talked about the importance of companies being clear on mission, and then the nonprofit sector started to get it. Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, one of the classic business bestsellers of all time, okay? 2 years after it came out and was on the New York Times bestseller list for a couple of years, he wrote Good to Great for nonprofits. Because his first book was all about businesses that had, bottom line profit was the main thing. But for a nonprofit, your bottom line is not money, but are you advancing a social mission in the world, okay? And it's really, I think when he did that, it signaled to the nonprofit sector, including faith communities, we've got to take this mission thing more seriously. Yeah, please.
Yeah, you talked about synagogues with a congregation of seekers and people who are questioning.
Yeah.
So how do you create that when you already have a foundation of those who don't job and out of the box, who only relate to being conservative, to being reform, and how do you create a community in all the above?
Yeah.
Big question, I know.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a great question. So here's the challenge about getting synagogues to be innovative. Every institution, by nature, has as its default modus operandi stasis, S-T-A-S-I-S. Stasis is simply we're saying like, I'm staying where I am. I'm not moving, okay? Like, don't move my cheese, okay? It's very hard to get any company, business, nonprofit to change, okay? Faith communities, let's talk about synagogues for the sake of this conversation, are even more problematic because what draws people to religion is ties to the past. And so there's a certain, almost a deification of tradition, which is actually what religion is. It deifies tradition. It says, God represents what we've always done. Larry Hoffman is one of my friends and colleagues who's also quite involved with the Synagogue Transformation Movement, teaches at Hebrew Union College in New York, has a great saying, I love to quote him, on most, you don't have it here, But in most synagogues, over the ark, on the area called the lintel, there's usually a saying, okay? And it might say something like, Daleth Nemiat Talmud, know before whom you stand, or a biblical quote. So Larry has this great quip. He says, if synagogues put over the ark a saying that represented the way synagogues mostly function, it would say, we have always done it this way. Which is exactly right. In other words, that's the rule, okay? And so, and one of the things, by the way, that, Kavod will laugh at this, because one of the things I talk to my rabbis about in my program is to say, you need to help train your leadership to be open to risk-taking. Like, in other words, changing what we've done is not violating some principle. It's essentially the way you commit to the next generation, okay? And so what I've said, in synagogues, because frankly the people who run synagogues are the loyalists, the people who like it the way it's always been, okay? And they'll say, don't move my cheese, Rabbi, okay? Don't move my cheese. I like it right where it is, okay? So a lot of the work I'll do when I'm consulting at a synagogue is to say, how do you get the people who care most about the synagogue to recognize that if you continue to say, don't move my cheese, you will ensure that your children and their friends will never come here except on high holidays. And if that's what you want, then I won't move your cheese. Now, do you want to move your cheese or not? Right? That's because everyone cares about, everyone wants their children to essentially continue something. Kavod asked me, Kavod had me for Shabbat dinner at his home, lovely, and he said to me, what was the highlight of your Passover? So I'll tell you what I told him. For the first time in my life, my son led a Seder. In other words, they've always been at my table, leading my Seder, and my eldest son just had a baby. It was my first grandchild this past summer. His name is Avi. Very cute. I can show you pictures later if you're interested, okay? And my oldest son always gave me and my wife a run for our money. He was our challenge child. He was filled with, jabs, and I was his number one target. At the Seder table, he'd give me a hard time, whatever else. To sit at his table and to see him lead a Seder in a serious way, is amazing, right? So that's what it's all about. Like, the things that we cherish, will our children cherish? It's possible to make that happen. And so, as much as let's imagine me now. I could be the oldest, nastiest, stick in the mud, stubborn a-hole you've ever met, okay? But then you say to me, do you want your children to essentially value what you spent your whole life on? Then you got to kind of lighten up here. You got to loosen up a little bit, okay? That's a conversation that we have to have with 10,000 Jews out there, okay? And I'm running as fast as I can. Please.
My name is Les Leinau. For several centuries, over the years, Judaism survived as a tradition of believing in God, believing in the Judaic values, and basically in the old ways. It morphed a little bit over the years, but now what I'm hearing is that we have to establish new communities based on new ideas in order to keep sort of the interest of the market.
Mm-hmm.
What underlying principle do you think we should keep of the old ways in order to preserve Judaism as a congregation of Jews
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah. I like the question a lot, and actually, you've heard about Jewish renewal, right? Now, I don't want to cross it out. The jury will disregard the last sentence. I want to take a different approach to that question, okay? Here's another piece of good news, kind of an addendum to my answer to the first question I had. Among the good pieces of news that we have out there is that younger Jews, at the same time that they are very suspicious of ethnic, tribal, let's keep the club closed, younger Jews see themselves as global citizens, not as Jews in a box. They don't like to see themselves. And yet, the value system of core Torah values are very central to this next generation of Jews. So when you look at principles like the belief in the dignity of every human being, right? Tselem Elohim is a value, okay? The notion of tzedek, of that we need to create a more just world. The idea of truth, of emet. These are core principles that come from the Torah, okay? When you, one of my books, I have 7 core principles from Rabbinic Judaism, okay? And I talk about the fact that these 7 principles could be put up in the room of, most Jewish millennials in generation X and Y, okay? They may not know the Hebrew term for them, but they resonated with the principles, okay? So I'm not concerned that we're going to kind of lose the essence of what Judaism is, okay? I believe that I run a project of young people who are actually reinventing Jewish life and community, okay? And what I'm finding is that they're imagining Jewish life in ways that I never would have imagined. But they're not straying, they're not becoming Buddhists, they're not becoming Hindus, not becoming Christians. They want to take the core values of Judaism, but they want to put it in their own idiom. And that is a process that we need to celebrate and encourage, not discourage, because I want them to say it my way. My son's Seder looked nothing like the Seder that I ran. And I could, if I still was that old curmudgeon, stubborn guy, I could have said, Danny, you did it all wrong, okay? And I would have been a horrible father for doing that, okay? And he never would have done another Seder. But I walked away so happy because he did it his own way, okay? In a way that I never would have done. But it was his taking ownership. I had empowered him enough that he took ownership of his Judaism and of his experience with Pesach at my table to do it his way for his growing family.
How can you integrate that thought of your own personal experience with the larger question for Jews of all different denominations and with these new ideas of just a mission statement? If I'm going, what is the commonality that still affirms the Judaism?
Look, I think this will be the last response. The model I'll give you is, I mentioned this process I did at my own synagogue at Adat Shalom, where each year we created guidelines on another core area of Jewish life, Shabbat, Tzedakah, Tikkun Olam, whatever else. So what I did in that community setting, I would say, is a model for any synagogue of any denomination, okay? I made sure that the community had a lot of time to learn some core ideas, sources, and texts, so they were familiar with it. And then I let them run with it. And I was not in that process. Because if the rabbi's in the room, every person in the room is going to keep looking over this and saying, like, what does Rabbi Sid think? Like, am I doing it right or wrong? There's no right or wrong here. Do you have the core ideas here? It's yours to run with, okay? My son didn't ask me what to do for the Seder. He was at my table for 35 years, and now it's his Seder to run for his family, okay? And what we should do is those who are, who kind of own the franchise, we need to be prepared to kind of give the keys over so that the next generation can drive the car. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Please come tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, in here.